Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I learned early on that family dynamics weren't always fair. From my earliest memories, my sister Margaret and I lived in two completely different worlds under the same roof. I remember the exact moment I first understood this harsh reality. It was during my 10th birthday party.
But Mom, you promised I could have a sleepover party this year. Honey, Margaret isn't feeling well today. We need to keep the house quiet.
Margaret had thrown a tantrum that morning because she wasn't the center of attention. My carefully planned party with 5 friends turned into a quick cake cutting with just our family. Margaret sat there with a smirk, miraculously recovered from her illness, just in time for cake. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. When I was 12, I won the school science fair.
That's nice, dear. Oh, Margaret, show us your new dance routine.
Mom barely glanced at my blue ribbon before turning her full attention to my sister's impromptu performance. By 14, I had learned to keep my achievements to myself. I joined the debate team, maintained straight A's, and started planning for college. Meanwhile, Margaret, 3 years older, was creating a different kind of reputation for herself. Mrs. Chen, we caught Margaret bullying younger students again.
There must be some misunderstanding. Margaret would never do such a thing.
I watched from the principal's office doorway as Mom defended Margaret, despite clear evidence and multiple witnesses. The next day at school, Margaret strutted down the hallway as if nothing had happened, while the younger students pressed themselves against the lockers to avoid her. High school brought even starker contrasts between our paths. At 16, I started my first real job as a waitress at the local diner. The early morning weekend shifts were exhausting, but every dollar I earned went straight into my college fund.
You don't have to work so hard, Victoria. We'll help with college.
Dad's words rang hollow as I watched them spend thousands on Margaret's dance classes and designer clothes. One particular incident stood out during my junior year. I had just received my SAT scores, nearly perfect. Hey Mom, Dad, I got my test results back.
Mom, Richard asked me to prom.
Just like that, my news was forgotten. Richard was the new star quarterback, and somehow Margaret had caught his attention. Mom and Dad were ecstatic about Margaret dating the popular athlete, even though she was already in her second senior year, having failed to graduate the first time.
This could be so good for her. Maybe Richard will motivate her to finally finish school.
I watched my SAT scores get buried under Margaret's prom dress catalogs. Things took a darker turn when Margaret got caught with marijuana at school. Not just possessing it, she was selling it.
Mrs. Chen, this is a very serious offense. We have no choice but to expel Margaret.
Instead of letting Margaret face consequences, my parents withdrew her before the expulsion could become official.
We're sending her to a prestigious private school. It will be a fresh start.
That prestigious private school lasted exactly 3 months before Margaret ran away with Richard. Mom and Dad were frantic. Meanwhile, I was pulling double shifts at the diner, studying between serving customers, and building my savings account dollar by dollar.
Your sister's disappeared. How can you just go to work like nothing's wrong?
She's just young and in love. Remember how we were?
Mom spent days crying while Dad tried to comfort her. I kept working. A week later, Margaret called from a friend's house, declaring her undying love for Richard and their plans to get married. Instead of putting their foot down, my parents made a deal. They would support the marriage if Margaret finished high school first.
Vicky, isn't it romantic? Richard says we'll have a big wedding.
Margaret was back home, planning her wedding while barely attending her new school. I added a second job at a coffee shop, working mornings before school. By my senior year, I had saved almost $40,000.
Look how much you've saved. You're going to have an amazing college experience, honey.
Linda, my manager at the diner, became more of a mother figure to me than my own mom. She helped me research scholarships and universities. By spring, I had been accepted to Columbia University with a substantial scholarship. The same week, Margaret announced she was pregnant. The timing couldn't have been worse or more predictable. Mom and Dad called a family meeting 2 weeks after Margaret's pregnancy announcement. I should have seen it coming.
Since you got that wonderful scholarship, Victoria, we need to discuss your college fund.
Dad's words made my stomach turn. I knew that tone. It was the same one he used when telling me my 10th birthday party had to be canceled.
Margaret and Richard need a proper home for the baby. They're starting a family.
And what about my future? I worked 3 years for that money. My voice cracked as I fought back tears. Don't be so selfish, Vicky. This is your niece or nephew we're talking about. Margaret sat there, one hand on her barely visible bump, wearing the innocent expression that had gotten her out of trouble so many times before.
Richard has a promising job lined up. They just need help with the down payment on an apartment.
What kind of job?
His uncle's construction company. He's going to be a site manager.
I knew Richard had never finished high school, let alone had any construction experience.
The money's in your account anyway, Mary. We've already made the decision.
Dad's words confirmed what I already knew. I had no say in this matter. That night, I called Linda from the diner, crying as I told her what happened.
Oh, honey. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away and build your own life.
The next few months were a blur of wedding preparations and baby shower planning. Mom and Dad spared no expense for Margaret's perfect day.
Victoria, your bridesmaid dress needs alterations. Can't you skip one shift at work? The wedding's more important than your part-time job.
I bit my tongue, knowing my job was now crucial since I had to start my college fund over from zero. The wedding was exactly as extravagant as Margaret wanted. 5 bridesmaids in designer dresses, a 5-tier cake, and a luxury venue.
I'm gonna give Margaret everything, Mr. Chen. You'll see.
Richard's promise at the reception rang hollow, especially since he'd already been fired from 2 jobs that year. I watched my parents beam with pride as Margaret threw her bouquet, her white dress barely concealing her growing baby bump.
Need an extra shift tomorrow? I know you're trying to save up again.
Yes, please. Every dollar counts now. The weeks after the wedding, I worked overtime while preparing for college. Mom and Dad were too busy helping Margaret and Richard move into their new apartment, the one bought with my savings.
Vicky, isn't the nursery adorable? Mom's helping me decorate.
Margaret's excitement felt like salt in my wounds. She had everything handed to her, while I was starting over from nothing. The day I left for college, Dad was helping Richard assemble baby furniture. Mom was at Margaret's first ultrasound appointment. Linda and her husband helped me move into my dorm instead. My first semester at Columbia was a balancing act between classes, work, and trying to rebuild my savings. I found a job as a barista at a campus coffee shop. That's where I met Sarah, who would become my closest friend and ally. You're taking a full course load and working 30 hours a week? That's intense. No choice. I have to support myself now. I told her my story during our breaks, and Sarah's family quickly adopted me into their lives. You're spending Thanksgiving with us. No arguments. Meanwhile, updates from home came through social media and occasional texts from Mom.
Thomas is here. 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Margaret did so well.
I stared at the picture of my nephew, trying to feel something beyond resentment. The first few months after Thomas's birth, Margaret's social media was full of perfect motherhood posts, matching outfits, professional photo shoots, daily updates. Then the posts became less frequent. When they did appear, I noticed concerning changes. Is that a bruise on your sister's arm in that photo? And where's Richard? He hasn't been in any pictures lately. Mom's texts became more defensive when I asked about Margaret.
They're just having normal newlywed struggles. Every couple goes through this.
But I recognized the signs. The same patterns from high school were emerging again. By the end of my first year at Columbia, I had made the dean's list while working 2 jobs. I was slowly rebuilding my savings. Mom, I earned a summer internship at a marketing firm.
That's nice, dear. Listen, have you talked to Margaret lately? She's not answering our calls.
The worry in Mom's voice was familiar. The same tone she used when Margaret disappeared with Richard years ago. Through mutual friends, I learned that Richard had lost his job at his uncle's company. They were 3 months behind on their utility bills. Then came the midnight call from Dad.
Your sister's in the hospital. They're saying it's an overdose.
I sat in my dorm room, numb, as he explained how they found Margaret unconscious while Thomas cried in his crib. Where was Richard?
Nobody knows. He's been missing for days.
Mom and Dad took Thomas while Margaret went to rehab. Richard showed up 2 weeks later, claiming he'd changed.
They're trying to get better, Victoria. We have to support them.
Support meant my parents emptying their retirement savings to pay for rehab and cover Margaret and Richard's mounting debts. I focused on my internship and studies, trying to ignore the growing chaos back home. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. Margaret completed rehab just as I started my sophomore year. Mom and Dad were convinced she had changed.
She's doing so well, Victoria. She and Richard are both clean. They've joined a support group.
Mom's hopeful voice couldn't mask the exhaustion. They were still watching Thomas most days while trying to help the young couple recover.
I'm really trying this time, Vicky. I want to be a good mom.
For a few months, it seemed like Margaret might actually turn things around. She got a part-time job at a retail store. Richard found work as a delivery driver. But during my Christmas visit home, I noticed things that my parents seemed determined to ignore. The way Margaret's hands shook, how Richard kept disappearing for hours, the growing pile of unpaid bills on their kitchen counter.
They just need more time.
Dad insisted, writing another check to cover their rent. By spring, the signs were impossible to ignore. Margaret lost her job. Richard started selling their furniture.
We found needles in their bathroom, Victoria. We don't know what to do anymore.
Mom's voice cracked during our weekly phone call. Where's Thomas during all this?
We have him most days. Margaret says she can't handle his crying.
I focused on my studies and internship, trying to build a life far from the chaos at home. But worry for Thomas gnawed at me constantly. During my rare visits home, I noticed how my old bedroom had been completely transformed into Thomas's nursery.
We thought it would be good for him to have his own space here.
Mom explained, not meeting my eyes. We both knew Thomas was spending more time with them than with his own parents. Then one morning, during my final exam week, my phone exploded with notifications.
Victoria, please call immediately. Emergency.
My hands shook as I dialed, stepping out of the library where I'd been studying.
She left him. Margaret left Thomas on our doorstep.
Mom's hysterical voice filled my ear. What do you mean, left him?
We found him this morning. There's a note. She wants you to raise him.
The world seemed to tilt sideways.
You need to come home right now. We're too old to raise a toddler.
I have finals this week. I can't just drop everything. After my finals, I took a train home. The house felt different. Toys scattered across the floor, the air heavy with unspoken words. Thomas was asleep in my old room when I arrived. He'd grown so much since I'd last seen him.
You need to read this.
Mom handed me a crumpled piece of paper, Margaret's hasty handwriting filling the page.
I can't do this anymore. I'm not cut out to be a mother. Victoria's always been the responsible one. the perfect one. She should raise Thomas. She'll give him the life I never could. I'm sorry.
There's more you need to know. We found needles in their apartment again. They've been stealing to support their habit.
How long has this been going on?
They sold everything in the apartment. All the furniture, the appliances, everything we bought them.
My college fund.
We thought we were helping them start a family. We were wrong.
For the first time, I saw genuine regret in Dad's eyes.
We need you to take Thomas. You can take a break from college.
I stared at my parents, their desperate faces illuminated by the kitchen lights. You want me to drop out? After everything?
Just temporarily. Until we figure something out. Margaret specifically asked for you.
Margaret lost the right to ask anything of me when she abandoned her son. My voice rose, and Thomas stirred in the next room. I immediately lowered my voice. We need to contact Child Protective Services.
No, we can't involve outsiders. This is a family matter.
Like how Margaret's drug addiction was a family matter. How did that work out?
We were trying to protect her.
No, you were enabling her. Just like you're trying to enable her now by asking me to give up my future. Thomas appeared in the doorway, clutching his stuffed dinosaur.
Auntie Vicky?
His small voice broke my heart. I knelt down to his level. Hey, buddy. Want to show me your toys? Spending time with Thomas that evening clarified everything for me. He needed stability, not another disrupted life. I'll help, but not by dropping out.
But how?
We're going to do this properly. First, we contact CPS. Then, you apply for temporary guardianship while I finish college. I laid out my plan, developed after hours of research and consulting with Sarah's mother, who is a family lawyer.
What if they take him away?
They won't. You're his grandparents, you have a stable home, and you've been his primary caregivers for months. But we need legal protection, for Thomas and for ourselves.
I never wanted any of this to happen.
For the first time, I saw Mom's armor crack completely. I know, but we can't keep pretending everything's fine. Thomas deserves better than that. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd saved. Hi, I need to report a case of child abandonment. The next few months transformed our family in ways I never expected. With CPS's involvement, everything had to be done properly and documented. Mom and Dad were granted temporary guardianship of Thomas, with regular home visits from a social worker named Karen. You're doing everything right. Thomas is clearly well cared for here. I continued my studies, but came home every weekend, establishing a routine with Thomas.
Auntie Vicky, can we read 3 stories tonight?
His vocabulary was growing rapidly, and his nightmares were becoming less frequent. Then, 6 months after Margaret's disappearance, the police found her and Richard.
They're in a rehabilitation facility in Ohio. They got arrested for possession and chose rehab over jail.
This time was different. Without my parents' safety net, they had to face real consequences.
I've been so stupid, Vicky. So selfish. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to get better. Really better this time.
Margaret's voice on the phone sounded clearer than it had in years. A year later, Margaret and Richard completed their program. They started supervised visits with Thomas.
We're taking parenting classes, getting our GEDs. I know I can't just take him back. I have to earn it.
2 years after Margaret left Thomas on our doorstep, I stood on the stage at Columbia's graduation ceremony. Looking into the crowd, I saw my parents, Thomas holding a "Congratulations, Auntie" sign, and even Margaret and Richard, now 1 year sober. The journey here hadn't been easy. My parents had to face their role in enabling Margaret's behavior.
We were wrong about so many things, Victoria, especially about taking your college fund.
Yes, you were. But we're learning to do better. Margaret and Richard were working steady jobs now, attending NA meetings, and having regular supervised visits with Thomas.
I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm grateful for it.
Thomas was thriving. His therapist said he was adjusting well to the structured custody arrangement.
Auntie Vicky, look what I drew in school today.
He showed me a crayon drawing of our whole family, grandparents, both his parents, and me. My marketing job started next month, and I'd found an apartment close to my parents' house, so I could still see Thomas regularly.
We're starting a college fund for Thomas. A proper one this time.
The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Sometimes broken families can heal, not by pretending the cracks don't exist, but by acknowledging them and growing stronger in the broken places. As I watched Thomas playing with both his parents and grandparents at my graduation party, I realized that sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations.